Welcome! In this series of short videos, we will look at topics common to both the PowerBasic console and Windows compilers. Today we will look again at enhancing an organisation chart which we have created programmatically to handle vacancies and charts for each department. This was our organisation chart at the end of the last video. We had successfully displayed all the members of staff within the organisation colour-coded for the department in which they worked, so it's easy to see from the chart which staff work for which particular departments. In any organisation, and especially the very large organisations, an organisation chart cannot remain static. By its very nature, it will change all the time as new staff are recruited and existing staff leave the organisation or move within the organisation to a different department or team. So one question I have been asked is how we can get our organisation chart to handle vacancies. This is a time period after a person has left and before someone else has been recruited to fill the vacancy. Will the creation of a vacancy break our organisation chart? As with all technical problems, it's important not to overthink the issue. Ideally, as soon as someone is leaving the organisation, a replacement should be sourced. If this is not an external replacement, it could be a temporary replacement from someone already in the organisation, who will stand in as a manager until the new member of staff has been recruited. This way the data that will come to you from the HR system will just have a substitute name in it. However, that is in an ideal world. You may well find within your own organisation that there are at times vacancies that have not been filled, and we need to find a way for our organisation chart to cope with vacancies and to illustrate them clearly in the chart. So let's have a look at the code. Within our code there are two main functions. The convert HR file function, which takes the data from HR and turns it into a file which our charting program can handle quite easily. The second function is the one that actually generates the organisation chart based on this translated data. So the easiest way of handling the occurrence of vacancies is to make a change with the original data. On our chart we have a member of staff called Gary Stanley. This person is a manager of 2 members of staff. If this manager is going to be leaving the organisation and we want to indicate on our chart that this post is now vacant, we'll need to look at the data we're taking in from HR. So here we have on screen our raw data from the HR system. We've highlighted the manager, which is about to become a vacant post. This person appears as a manager of 2 members of staff. So the record in the HR data, 1014, is about to become vacant. The easiest way of doing this is to replace the name of the manager with the word vacancy. We will also replace the manager's name in the 2 members of staff who report to that post with the word vacancy. If we save that and export that to our CSV file, we have now updated the HR staff list CSV file. If we run our application now without having to make any change to the code, and we refresh our chart, we will see that the word vacancy has now replaced the manager's name. However, we want to highlight that on the chart to show this is a vacant post. So let's go back to our PowerBasic code and put a small change in there. The code that generates our chart is in the build tree function. This steps through all the data and creates the HTML. In this we have picked up the name of the person, and in this case that will contain the word vacancy. Further down the code we're actually setting the background colour of the box which contains the person's name. Now there is nothing in this code at the moment that would actually change the colour of the box if the name of the person is vacancy. So we're going to make a minor change to the getDepartmentColor function. We're going to give it an extra parameter. We're going to pass the person's name to that function, and we can add on the extra parameter to that function. Now that we have the name going into that function, we can actually change the colour of the background if the name is actually vacancy. So all we're doing is using the case statement to force the name to be uppercase for the first character, and checking to see if it matches the word vacancy. If it is, we're going to set the colour to a colour of yellow. If the name of the person isn't vacancy, then we will leave the coding as it is. So if we try running that code now, go back to our chart and reload it. Now the vacant post is shown in bright yellow. Therefore, just a glance at the organisation chart should make it easy to pick out the posts which are currently vacant. So now that we've solved that problem, one of the things we mentioned in the last video was creating charts for each individual department. If you have a large organisation with many hundreds or even thousands of staff, the organisation chart is going to be very big, and you may want to generate a subchart just of a department staff. So that in this chart at the moment we have 4 departments: marketing, HR, IT and networks. If we wanted to generate a chart just for the marketing department, how would we go about doing that with our existing code? If we go back to our PB main function where the work is begun, we first convert the HR file to a format we can handle for the chart. Then we generate the HTML chart itself. Each of these functions takes 2 parameters: the input file and the staff list and the output file. So if we wanted to generate a single file for a particular department, how would we go about doing that? First of all, we'll declare a local variable and we'll set that to marketing. So we're going to be extracting from the HR file just the marketing records. As we already have a convert HR file function, we'll want to do something very similar. So we're going to amend that function to accept an optional parameter. This will save creating a brand new function, and the optional parameter we're going to pass to it is the name of the department. So when we call this function, if there is no optional parameter, then it will run for all departments. If there is a parameter, it will run for that department alone. And having produced that file, we can just call the generate org chart once more, but change the parameters. The generate org chart is still going to take 2 parameters, but the first is going to be the name of the input file, in this case marketing.txt, and the output file is going to be marketing.html. So let's go to the convert HR file function and make the necessary changes. Our first task is to add on the optional parameter. This is entered using the optional keyword. Every parameter after the word optional is an optional parameter. So this function can be called one of 2 ways. It can be called without any parameter whatsoever, and it can be called with a parameter. So we can test to see whether this parameter is there or if it's missing. So I'm going to create a local variable called filter department, which we will store the department should it be as one of the parameters. We're going to use the isMissing function to determine whether the department has been passed in on the parameter list or not. If it is missing, then we'll set the filter department to be an empty length string. If the parameter is present, then we will populate filter department with that department value. Now that we've stored that information, we're going to go around this for next loop. The for next loop's first task is to pick up the department name. If we have actually populated that we want only a single department, then we can filter at this point, so we can test the content of the filter department variable. If the value is not blank, then we're filtering by department. So if the filter department passed in is not the same as a department for that particular user, then we can use the iterate command. The iterate command jumps to the next that we're currently within. So since we're doing a for next loop, it would go to the next value of the long R variable, and would skip over the record that has a department that we're not interested in. So we try running our application now, and let's see how far we get. Well, the application runs, it is called the building tree function twice, as expected, and if we have a look in the code, we have successfully generated a marketing.txt file. However, there does not appear to be an HTML file. So there's obviously something it's not handling. If we have a look at the marketing.txt file, it does appear to have a lot of blank data. If we scroll down, we can see the data that we want in that file is at the end of the file. So why do we have so many blank records at the beginning of the file? If we look again at our code before the for next loop, one of the first things we do is to prepare the output array. And we're setting the size of that to be the same size as the input array. However, as the output array is only going to contain a single department, it's obviously going to be smaller than the input array. So we'll need to do something to filter out this blank data, so that the output array only has the data in it that it actually needs. As with anything, there are a number of ways of actually doing this. However, we're going to be quite pragmatic here and make a minor change to the array dump function. This function takes as an input an output file name and an output array. It will take that array and write every record in that array to the file. So we're going to add on an extra parameter. If we have a look at the file handling routines library, this is where this array dump function actually exists. If we have a look at the array dump function, it's quite simply a for next loop that reads through every record within the array and sends it out to the file. So we're going to add on an optional parameter to this one, and we're going to call that no blanks. This will be a true or a false. And as we did before, we're testing to see whether this optional parameter exists or not. If the parameter does exist, then we're picking up the value and setting it into our exclude blank data. This will be a true or a false. If the data is actually missing, there is no optional parameter, then we will assume the value to be false. This will allow us later on, when we're going to attempt to print to the file, to do it conditionally. We will test to see whether the exclude blank data variable is true, and if the value on the data record is actually blank. In that case, we will do absolutely nothing. We will not output the file. Otherwise, we will print everything out to the file. So having made that change to the library, we can now go back to our original code, and we're going to add in the extra parameter. We're going to mark it true, as we want to exclude any blank lines. So if we run the application again now, the build tree function runs twice as expected. If we have a look in our folder, if we now have a look at the code, we can see our marketing text file is now quite happily showing all the records that are not blank. However, we still don't have an HTML file for marketing. There is one more change we need to make. The function we use to add to the HTML file is called from within the application. And this is effectively hard-coded to go to this export file, the HTML output. As we're going to be producing two files, we'll need to amend this to take an extra parameter. And that will be the file to output to. So there will now be a second parameter, and we can replace the existing hard-coded path with this parameter. So every call to this function will need to be amended to tack on which output file it's going to be using. So if we have a look at the generate org chart function, this is the function which adds the header, the footer, and the build tree output to the file. So here is our first entry for add to HTML. We can now add on the output file name, and we'll add that parameter to our build tree function and also to the second call to put the footer in. Now, as we've added this extra parameter to build tree, we'll need to go into that function and add it on as another parameter. So now that we've added that parameter onto the function, we can look through the rest of this function to see if any more changes are needed. So anywhere where this function is referenced, we'll need to add on this extra parameter. So that should be all the extra parameters we need to add in. Just try a test compile to make sure we haven't missed any. And we have one too many commas in there. And it compiles quite cleanly now. So let's try once more to run the application. And both the building tree functions have completed, so let's have a look to see if we now have an HTML file. And we do indeed have a marketing HTML file. If we open that up, we'll see that it has the head of marketing and all the members of staff that report to them. As you can see here. It does, however, have the CEO as a prefix. We had that in our original chart as the top person in the tree was the chief executive. We can amend that quite easily. In the build tree function, this is what goes through each record to create our HTML document. At the moment, the first entry in the file has CEO hard-coded within it. Since we've already picked up the department, we want to replace this reference with the department name, like so. So if we try running our application once more, and have a look at our HTML file. If we just reload this, we'll see it now has marketing as the top entry. So we can see in this case that Gordon Buckley is indeed the head of the marketing department, and all the staff members are shown underneath them, as it was on the original chart. So as you can see, we can just reuse the functions we've already created to generate an organization chart for each of the departments. At the moment in the code, we have hard-coded it for marketing. However, once you have actually generated the original organization chart for the whole organization, it would not be difficult to look through the HR file and pull out a list of the department names. Having obtained that list, you could then use a for next loop to step through this section of code, populating the str department variable with the name of the department you're currently processing. This way the program could generate an organization chart for every department automatically. However, I'll leave you to put that code in yourself. That's it for today. Thank you for watching.